Welcome back to another episode of The Sweet Spot. This is John Sherman from the Four Foundations of Golf. And as always, I'm joined by.
Adam from Adam in Golf.
So today we're going to have a discussion about how scoring takes place. So I think a lot of the myths and stories that were told for years still stick around. And it's helpful to understand two things, I think. Like, how does scoring occur? Like, and more importantly, the questions like really like, how do golfers separate from one another? Like, why does one golfer break 190 or even 80 and showing people what that looks like? And I think as we've done that many times on the show and you and I have done it elsewhere, is that the feedback from golfers is, well, that's helpful because I thought it was different and I was chasing something different or expecting something different. And my whole viewpoint on the game changed because now I understand what scoring really looks like. And that can have a whole host of influences on someone, how they react to shots, how they plan out strategically, more importantly, where they're spending their practice time. So it's important stuff. And it seems like obvious in retrospect, right? When you see it.
Yeah, I know. I think I know where you're going to go with this, with like the fairways and greens and stuff. My brain is going to go to, okay, well, how are those created through impact?
Yeah, well, there's that
and
too.
I think the differences there will be even shockingly smaller when people
Yeah.
realize it. It's
Well,
like,
it's
oh, the
small
difference
but big
between
at the same
a
time.
pro and a scratch is like half a degree standard deviation of club face. It's like,
Yeah.
what? Really?
Well, what we'll do today is I recently Shotscope, which is a shot tracking company, they released their data performance report for 2026. So I think it's cool when companies like Shotscope or Arcos or any of the other data companies like release these findings. It's interesting. They're good talking points. So I think you can download this for free on their website. It's a pretty nice PDF. So I'm going to kind of poke through some of the main points that I saw. And it really kind of, as I've been thinking about it, really it was like a narrative about scoring in general, about why golfers get stuck at certain levels. So we'll talk about, scoring in general, like obviously the birdie, par, bogey, double breakdown, and then, into tee shots, approach shots, wedges, and putting. And I don't think anyone's going to be shocked by this information if they've been following us or, reading Mark Brody's work or Scott Fawcett's, but it's super important to reinforce this stuff. And I'm sure you'll have some interesting takes on this. The first thing that came across in the report was, and just so everyone's clear on this, it's 870,000 rounds, 74 million shots on over 24,000 courses in 124 countries. So it's a pretty good sample size. Now, I would say that this likely errs on the side of a more serious golfer because they bought ShotScope and tracked their rounds with it. So it's definitely a subset of golfers, but a very wide representation of them in terms of how many were captured.
Yeah, I told you when I got Zwift. Have you ever heard of Zwift?
No.
It's a fitness thing for cycling. So I was
Okay.
looking at Pelotons, and Pelotons were like thousands and thousands of dollars, and this Zwift was where you can use your bike. You just have to attach it to a thing. And so I started riding on that, and I was like, why am I in the bottom 5% of fitness
Yeah.
here?
This is all the best
And
spikers in the
I was
world.
looking up what the best, what you get a rating called your FTP, which is basically your handicap for golf. And I was like, well, my FTP is not awful. Like on Peloton, it says it would put me in the top 50%. But obviously it was the bias of people who use Zwift are super into
Yeah.
into that. So, but I mean, lots of golfers now are using these
Yeah.
tracking
That
devices.
That being said, a lot of what I'm about to share, I've seen across the board, even like in USGA handicap stuff. So the first thing that they kind of saw with scoring distribution is that, most golfers can break 100 or 90, but there's this massive like traffic jam around like 86, 87. So the majority of their users are shooting in the mid to high 80s with, some rounds significantly higher or lower, which when you look at, the USGA breakdown of handicaps, uh, most handicap, I think average handicap is about a 14. So that doesn't mean that they're averaging 14 over par. That actually means that's what they're capable of shooting. So their average would actually be higher than that. But you just see this massive cluster of golfers who, again, are breaking 190. But as you start going lower and lower to breaking 80 and beyond, then you're dealing with a much smaller percentile of the population. So I don't think that's shocking information, but the way they presented it when they kind of smoothed it out is saying like, yeah, golfers just get stuck here. And that's, the answer, the question becomes, well, why? Why do they get stuck there?
What do
Like
you think?
nine,
What does the data
yeah,
show?
well, here we say, so I think 95% of golfers are breaking 100, 75% are breaking 90, and then only 30% or less are breaking 80. Mm, So when you look at the makeup of why that happens, no one should be shocked by this as a sweet spot listener. It's not because of birdies, because as we know, even scratch golfers are only averaging 1, 2 birdies around at most. A lot of this is because of obviously more pars, but good bogeys. So we talked about that on other episodes. That these golfers who graduate beyond each level get better and better at taking the amount of double bogeys they're making and shrinking it when you get down to the scratch level, they're making less than one per round. So more pars, a lot of good bogeys, but the double bogeys or worse are just being eviscerated over time. And one way that showed up, what actually surprised me was actually par five scoring. So what they found was for the higher handicap golfers, par fives were actually a big problem. So it was disproportionately penalizing the higher handicaps. And as people got to 10, 5, and below handicaps, now the par fives became an outlier in terms of their scoring separation. So again, when we look at each level of golfer, we're asking the question, why do they separate from one another? Par threes were not the main sore thumb. Par threes are difficult for everyone. For a scratch golfer, they're averaging
Even for
about,
pros.
even for pros, over par. Scratch golfers half a stroke over par on a par three. And that line is not as dramatic going from a 0 handicap up to a 25. It just gets slightly higher. But when you look at the par five, the scratch golfer, the 5 handicap, they are just minimally over par. Whereas you get to those 10, 15, 20 handicap levels, they're getting to bogey or worse. So it was really the par five was a big separator, which I found kind of interesting. I wouldn't assume that at first.
I would.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, when you go to the handicap index of most golf holes, the par fives are the ones where the higher handicaps get more shots, right? It's just because it's more difficult for them. Like for us, when we get to a par five, we're like, okay, this is an opportunity. Whereas I know lots of people get the par fives if they're high handicaps and they're like, oh God, I could shoot a big number here. I could, at some point,
Yes.
the more shots you're hitting, the more chance there is of a big
Yeah.
bad
So
one.
from like a global perspective, like that seems to be one of the big separate, like whereas par fours, more of a straight line down, like just, you know, more of a direct relationship where, the better players obviously score lower, but it was really the big takeaway is like the best players, par fives are a scoring advantage. And for worse golfers, it's a bit of a disaster for them. So yeah, similar story there that what we've always discussed is that, the math of shooting lower scores, like, yeah, breaking 190, more so about cleaning up like those really big mistakes or like double chips and three putts and a lot of like kind of skill based, like basic stuff that gets cleaned up and gets rid of those doubles and triples. But as you get to the 80s and below, then it becomes a different standard. So like we move to off the tee. And I think this was interesting because, yeah, obviously better players hit it longer, like no question. But like what they found was that the distribution of driving was more so the overlap between consistency. So they measure a player average and average shot. And what they found was that if you were a 15 handicap compared to a 10 handicap, they actually could hit the ball farther if they just reach their potential more often. So, for example, the average drive of a 15 handicap is 214 yards, but the player average, which is like the well struck shot, they remove all the outliers and say this is your potential, was 240 yards. So it showed that like each handicap level has the ability to hit it farther. They see that in their data. They just don't do it as often. So it's more of an efficiency issue.
What was the correlation a relationship between the handicap level and the what do you call it? A player distance?
It's called
Like I would be
the
looking at the
P.
top 80 percentile,
Yeah, the
the top
P
20%.
average is what they call their. It's like their well struck shot. So if you're going to hit 500 drives on there, obviously player might top some, or they might hit one downwind that goes way. So they kind of remove the outliers and they settle on the average for all of your drives, and then the P average, which is like your well struck shot. So that's your potential, and the discrepancy is smaller as you get better. But
Between
more
the levels, yeah.
importantly, yeah, because the difference between the average and P average narrows and narrows as you get
So
better.
intraplayer and interplay. I'm thinking about like what's the P average for a scratch versus the P average for a 10 versus the P average for a
The
15.
P average for scratch is 281. The
Right, okay.
15 is 240. But
So
again,
there's a big difference, okay.
yeah, there's only, yes, better players hit it farther. We knew that. But this is more of like an efficiency. We talk about that a lot more so with like strike location and hitting up on it. The point was that each handicap level already has the ability to hit it farther than someone who's better than them. They're just not doing it as often. So you have the option of swing speed upgrades or efficiency upgrades to increase distance. And yeah, the better players narrow that gap. The difference between their average and their potential is far more narrow because why do you think they're hitting it on more centered strikes and not having all those swings where they top the ball or pull hook it and they lose 50, 80 yards.
What is the difference between the P average and average at certain levels? So the difference between, was it scratch is like 260 off the T average? Or
56
even,
average and 281 for the P average. And then if you go down to a 10
okay, so
handicap, it's
15.
yeah, so only 15. If you go down to like 10 handicap, the average is 228. So far lower, but their P average is 253. So meaning that player is losing 25 yards that they already potentially have. It's not, they actually have the ability to hit it that far. They're just not doing it as nearly as often as they could be. So that gap becomes bigger and bigger. And I think it shows that we're all about increasing swing speed, but I think we always look to efficiency first.
I'm thinking about my data from Tangent. I think my top 80th percentile is about 275 or something, and my average is about 260. So that's about 15. Yeah, yes, 15 yards. I'd have to dig into the data, but yeah. I
Yeah,
think
I mean, that's when I think about what's a good tee shot for myself or anyone else, it's fairways are great, but keeping it in play. But more often, like, did you hit it close to your typical distance? Not your like home run shot,
you can't take
not
the
your,
longest because there are shots
yeah.
out
Well,
there that
that's
are
what this, yeah,
downwind and
exactly. And
elevated tees.
that's what this is removing. It takes out all those outliers that are too long or too short. So yeah, you're looking like, so for me, I think that number is like, if I hit a really good drive, it's like, I'm at like 285. If I hit it 250, then I'd be like, I didn't catch it. It didn't, that cost me 35, 40 yards because I mishit it, not because my swing speed dropped 8 miles an hour. So I think I think it's good news that most players have the potential to get those 20 or 30 yards more. It's accessing your skill more often. Not earth shattering information, but it just showed like that overlap that players already had the distance. They just weren't accessing it nearly enough was the big takeaway there. And then when they look at tee shot dispersion, it's like, yeah, everyone's spraying it and better players spray it less. So I'd be interested to get a deeper dive into this. So like the dispersion left to right for a scratch golfer was 90 yards and the dispersion, for a 15 handicap was like 110, but I'd love to know the frequency, right?
What is the percentage of shots they're gathering? Is that every single shot? Because I mean, if you hit one
Yeah.
horrible shot, that's gonna,
Yes.
or is
So
that the 95 percentile of?
I think this
shots?
is all of them, but I'd like to see like
Okay.
the scatter plot of, I mean, it shows better players spray it less. And we've kind of seen that with a lot of, Scott Fawcett always has his 65 to 70 yard dispersion in all of his testing with elite players. You're never going to get inside of that if you hit enough shots. But
Yeah, I'd look at 2 standard deviations. So yeah, if you have a 15-yard standard deviation with your driver, which I hear is very, very good, then that's going to give you, what is it in standard deviation, 66% of your shots will finish within 30-yard circle, and 95% of them will finish within a 60-yard circle. So basically 1 in 20 is going to go outside of Scott Fawcett's
Yeah, I think that's what
calculations.
this is showing. It's showing like the extreme outlier ones as the outer bands of this. Yes, you are seeing a tightening in dispersion as handicap drops, as you'd expect, but also there's a limitation to how straight you can get as well. Like no one's ever going to hit, 85% of their drives within a 20 to 30 yard dispersion, meaning like you would hit most of your fairways unless you are just, I think there's some examples. I think,
Mo
what was his
Norman.
name on the PGA Tour? Yeah,
I'm
there used to be
thinking
a
Mo
player.
Norman.
Yeah, Mo Norman types. Yeah, but for everyone else, like, yeah, we're kind of spraying it, and the better players spray it less and have less of those shots off the tee. So yes, distance matters, but it's not this like crazy race to 120 mile per hour swing speed. It's more of if you could work on your efficiency, mostly strike with driver, that is what can get you to the next level in scoring. And as we've talked about, learn to hit up on it a bit. And of course, you want to do the swing speed stuff. We're all for that too.
And just monitoring, I think, like I've said, alluded to a few times on the podcast, monitoring where the big misses come from.
Yes.
I'm starting to notice that. I mean, with driver, it's almost all face. With modern drivers, it's almost all face direction. It's not even so much strike anymore, because with the modern drivers, with bulge and roll, curve, moment of inertia, everything, if you strike it on the toe, yes, it will take a different route to get to your target or where it would have finished, but it's still going to finish in the same place. Like, I've got a GC quad, so I know if I hit with a square path and a square face, it doesn't matter where I hit on the face, it's going to end up very close to that center line. And if I present the face 2 degrees open, it's going to go 30 yards right, regardless of whether I sweet spot it, whether I toe it, heel it. It just takes a different route to get there. So for me, when the big misses happen, it's just combined errors, just small combined errors. It's like, okay, I've got a left side swing, came from nowhere. Plus I took a stronger grip. Plus I hit the last one a little bit right. So I was trying not to make this one go right. And it's those 3 things that combine to produce one that goes like 45 yards left. I mean, that's why I was talking about this dispersion size earlier, is because I had a practice session recently where I had a very tight pattern, but I just
Yeah.
had one big miss in there.
Yeah.
That threw off if you look at the dispersion size, it would have been big, but if you look at the standard deviation, it was actually quite small.
Yeah. So I think in general, for anyone listening to this, whatever scoring goal you want to reach, you don't have to learn how to increase your swing speed 10 or 15 miles an hour. You don't have to go crazy with that. It's more about like they didn't find that big of a disparity in distance potential. It was more of distance executed. So the better players are executing their distance more often. And that is strike quality. And then with the dispersion stuff, yeah, your better players are quarter degree, half degree more tolerant in face open or close, full degree. But there is a limit to that because you could only hit it so straight in general. Um, but I think, you know, the thing that most people, I guess the crux of this discussion as we will go to approach shots, wedge and putting is that why are most golfers getting stuck in the 80s and they would say like, "Oh, I just don't get up and down enough. I don't make enough putts." And it's really like this cascading effect. You have to look backwards. What caused you to have that 15-footer for par? And it starts with your tee shots. It's like this cascading effect where you keep getting a little bit further and further behind the 8 ball. And that's why you have that 15-footer for par or 25-footer for bogey. And it's not about what's happening around the green as much. It really, everyone psychologically gives so much weight to that finality of what happened on the hole that they're just realizing that, like, oh, yeah, I left myself 30 yards further away because I hit that one way off the bottom of the club on the heel. That's one error. So now we move on to approach shots. And what would you expect if they told you the distance remaining after each tee shot by handicap level? What would you assume?
I mean, it gets farther as you go
Yeah, it
higher
just
up the
gets
handicaps.
exactly. It gets far like a 15 handicap is leaving themselves between 145 to 157 yards from the hole, whereas the scratch golfer is 124 to 120.
Well, there's two things going on, right? They're leaving themselves longer in, and they're
Yes.
also worse from the same distance.
Yes,
So it's
exactly.
a
It's a
compounding of
double-edged
that.
sword.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was something that Brody's work revealed, was that distance is not equal to everyone. It is more penalizing to shorter hitters because the more skilled ball striker, typically with the faster swing speed, you put them both at 170 yards, the 15, 20, 25 handicap will struggle way more than the skilled ball striker. So meaning that being farther away from the hole is a bigger penalty for lower skilled players. And that's why like this cascading effect happens. You know, you misstrike that drive and you've left yourself, oh, I'm only 20 yards farther, but that 20 yards now makes it harder to hit the green or even reach the green. So obviously, the farther away from you are from the hole, like greens and regulations start dropping off like a cliff. Like they have this image here. It's kind of a heat map, green and regulation by approach distance. And like the yellow is the better one. And then purple and black is like not good. So, like, yeah, as soon as you get, when you look at a 10 or 15 handicap, so that golfer who's getting stuck in that high 80s, it just gets darker and darker from 100 yards out. Like the amount of greens they're hitting drops precipitously. Whereas the player who, if they had left themselves 100 yards, it's easier. Like I know these things sound like so straightforward, but when you're reviewing your rounds and you're thinking about like, why am I not getting better at this game? Like, yeah, the 160-yard, that could be a 6-iron for you versus the 110-yard, I don't know, pitching wedge or 9-iron is a world of difference in outcomes. Like a
Well,
massive difference.
this is why strokes gained is so important to look at instead of greens in regulation, fairways in regulation, or putts. Putts per round is just I don't want to say useless metric. It's not useless, but it is not a good metric.
It's close to useless.
Yeah, I just didn't want to anger
I still
certain
love
people. Say, "Oh, well, it's good in this
I
unique
still like
scenario."
the greens in regulation as like a rallying
Yeah,
call.
I think that's probably the
Like
best old stat.
like you want to be the best player you can be, you want to wear out the green. And that means a lot of things. Like that's what you're building towards if you want to play your absolute best golf. Because when we get to chipping and putting, that's where this really shows up. So like there are some differences in like lies. So I think we kind of knew that, missing the fairway is about a third of a stroke penalty for most players, which they show in this. Like, yeah, hitting more fairways is better, but hitting also fairway bunkers and trees is a much bigger disproportionate penalty. So that's why you kind of use your best to aim away from trouble on certain holes. If there's trees or water on one side and just rough on the other, then you kind of take the lesser of two evils. Is an approach that kind of sticks in people's head, like choosing, you don't always get to choose where the ball lands, but you can kind of aim away from big trouble when it's possible. But yeah, it just becomes clear how hard it is to overcome longer approach shots when you see this. Like it is and that goes for people who also like to not take driver off the tee because it makes them feel safe inside. Like when you take that 4-iron, you're like, oh, this hole looks tough. I'm going to hit 4-iron here. Now you're 40, 50 yards farther. Again, your chances of hitting that green drop off a cliff.
If you got say you're hitting 100 yards into a green and you hit a tour average approach, you're going to hit the vast majority of greens. Whereas if you're going in with a 4-iron, even if you hit a similar tour level quality shot, tour average, the amount of greens you hit drops off a massive amount. So, I mean, we know
Yeah.
this. It's harder to hit a 4-iron in than a wedge, but
Yeah, but
it's disproportionately unfair.
again, like when you ask people, when someone finishes their round, be like, "What'd you shoot today?" I'm like, "Oh, I shot 94." They're like, "Why?" They're like, "Oh, I missed this putt. I missed." It's usually like that, and no one would ever say like, "Yeah, I left myself a lot of 170-yard approach shots instead of 120." Like, that doesn't seem as obvious to golfers. You more think about like the finality of each shot, being like, "Oh, I had this 6-footer for so and so." Or I just couldn't get up and down all day. Like I just made like so many bogeys and doubles, I couldn't get up and down. And like, no, it's more because of this stuff. Like this stuff is putting you it starts from the tee box and the approach shot, and then you get stuck with what I will talk about, like the chipping and the wedge shot and the putting. It's like it's too late, right? So
Yeah, I see this
it
all the time when I'm looking at people's tangent data is,
yeah,
they'll say, "Oh, my driving, I need to hit more fairways with my driver." And I have a look at it and I'm like, "You missed one more fairway than I did
yeah,
that
yeah,
day, and I shot 20 shots lower than you." It's like it's not about hitting more fairways here. It's just, I'm hitting it 50 and I'm not a long hitter. I'm just talking about, some 20 handicappers that I coach. The difference is the distance. I'm hitting 50 yards past you, and so that's where the strokes are gained
yeah. It is
predominantly.
fairways hit is a on its own is I think putts per round and fairways hit on their own are almost borderline worthless statistics. If I'm going to be harsh, because it just doesn't. If you told me you have two players who hit 50% of their fairways, and that's all you told me, I have no clue. Or one hit 60%, one hit like 39. I still don't know which one is the better driver of the golf ball. I have no clue. Most would assume it's the 60%, but what if they hit it 40 yards shorter? And also, when they miss the fairway, tons of fairway bunkers and trees, and they're just, they had a lot of penalty shots. It's just distance and what happens when you miss the fairway are more important. And in putts per round, it's like, I don't know where your starting putt distance was. I have no
Well, there's
clue.
that famous thing of Tiger. Years ago, before strokes gained was even a big thing, Tiger was talking about how he had something like 26 putts in a
Yeah.
round. And they were like interviewing him saying, "Oh, you had a great round of putting." And he's like, "No, it was horrible. I missed so many putts." And
Yeah.
they were like, how they came off thinking, well, how is he saying that? That doesn't make sense. He's had 26 putts. How can he say he's had a bad round of putting? And then someone analyzed it strokes gained years later when we had that kind of data. And they were like, actually, he was accurate. He didn't putt that well
Yeah. Yeah.
that
He
day
knows.
because he was putting from like 5 feet all day or 4 feet all day. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. If you
he's
hit a
missing
bunch of,
greens, chipping it up to 4 feet,
yeah.
missing a ton of putts.
Yep. And missing a 4 footer for him is like point 0.7 strokes lost.
Didn't Corey Pavin intentionally miss greens sometimes so he could get on the leaderboard for putts per round? I think there was some kind of prize that was awarded for
Yeah. I
lowest
mean, that's
putts
all they
per
could
round
track
per
back then.
season.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think there's definitely a story of that. I don't know how true it is, but there was a
That'd be
player's like,
awesome
I'm
if
going
that
to
were true.
miss the greens all day just to get this award. I'll have to
Yeah.
look more
So,
into that.
yeah, I mean, you told me someone hits 65% of their greens. I know that's a good golfer. I know it. 100%. They're a good player. They could three putt a lot, but I'd be like, you show me someone who had 60% of greens in regulation versus 20 or 30 or 35. I'm putting my money on the higher greens in regulation because again, that shows me two things. One, their tee game puts them in a place to hit greens in regulation. More importantly, the most important skill for separation approach play, they are executing more often there. So that is again, it's you can do the near greens in regulation statistic as well, which we're going to get into now with like wedge proximity.
Tangent does a greens in regulation, like approach greens in regulation. I can't remember the exact name, but it's basically when you are in a situation where you can hit a green, do
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like sometimes if I'm like, say I'm on a par five and I bomb a drive down there and I've got 180 left in, I think it counts that as a green in regulation attempt as well. Whereas if you bosh a drive into the trees and you have to chip out, it doesn't take that into account because it's more like how good was your approach shot versus having the drivers influence it. And it
yeah.
also
You
tells
want
you when you miss a green, it tells you it was because your approach shot or it was because of a drive or some other error.
Yeah, that's nice because there's nuance to it. If you didn't have the opportunity to hit the green, then that's a tee shot problem. But if you had the opportunity to hit the green, you missed it, well, then that's approach shot problem. So you have to
Yeah.
differentiate like where are the strokes being lost the most. So yeah, I think I always go back to that number that in Brody's book that I first saw. Golfers separate the most with tee shots and approach shots. It's 2/3 of scoring. It explains on the whole, not everyone, there are outliers, of course, but in general, like the 2/3 of scoring can be explained by your tee shots and approach shots. They influence your scoring more than wedge and putting, which again, I think because wedges and putting are more accessible to everyone, it's towards the end of the hole. We use them more often. That seems to be where the influence can be had. But let's get back to that thought of separation. Like, how can golfers separate? And one interesting stat they pulled up was shots to finish from 50 yards. So if you leave yourself, whether this is a par five or a long, wedge shot into a par four, there is virtually no separation between the scratch and 25 handicap. Everyone is taking 3 shots to finish at minimum.
Really? Okay,
Yes.
that one surprises me more.
So it takes a scratch golfer 3 shots on average to finish from 50 yards from the hole, meaning they would make par
Okay.
on a par 5 or bogey on a par 4 if they left themselves that distance. And the separation is not massive if you look at if it's, 3.3 shots for a 15 handicap. But if you look at the heat map of up and down rates, similar to approach shots, you have to be very close to the green to even have a 50 to 60% chance of getting up and down, like inside of 10 yards for a scratch golfer to go over 50%. And
What
once
about
you
the
get out,
reverse? What does it go? What's the 3.5 shots to get down? Does it have that?
3.5 would be, you'd have to be outside of probably the 60, 70 yard area to start averaging that. I don't have that in front of me. They didn't have that in here, but they kind of
And
drew that line in the sand at 50 yards for that 3 shots to get up and down.
yeah, that's interesting though. When you effectively create a par, what handicap you create a par? What is it? 3 shots to get down for a 15 handicap? What distance is that? So it's
I
50
don't,
for a scratch.
yeah, so it's probably going to be, I don't know, 60, somewhere between 60 to 70 yards, something like that. It's just going to
No,
be further
it'd be
from the hole.
closer for no, it'd be closer for a higher handicap. To get down in 3
Oh, I'm
shots, it
sorry, to
needs to
get
be
down 3
closer.
shots. Yes, yes. So it
Yeah.
would be, okay. Yeah. Correct. But yeah, again, it's an issue of proximity. Like, you cannot, when you miss a green, like, you want to miss it better to make less double bogeys. But the limiting factor of getting up and down is so severe. Like, the penalty for missing greens is so severe that you can only do so much with wedge proximity. So another stat that they showed was short game proximity from 30 yards. Likely one putt distance is going to be inside of 6, 5, 4 feet when you start going above 50% make rates for just about any handicap level. So from 30 yards with a wedge, the average proximity for a scratch golfer is like 12 or 13 feet. 15 handicaps like 20 feet, 25. You cannot get the ball close enough. It's not possible, even for a tour player. You can't get it close enough to make more than 50% of up and downs, like, as you get 60, 90, 100 feet away from the pin. It's just too hard. Like, I know this is like demoralizing to people, but I also, want to be truthful. Like, that's why, everyone's just like, oh, my wedge and putter can save me. Like, it can only do so much. Like, the up and down rate from 50 yards is like nothing. And from 30 yards, it's, way less than a coin flip, like way, way, way less. So you're talking like 10, 20, 30%. It would be really good.
Obviously, the skill is harder with short game. It's harder to get it. Say you have a 20-yard shot and it's a putt versus a shot out of the rough.
Yeah. It's just
The
hard.
skill is obviously much harder with the short game to get it closer, but also there are more things that are outside of your control. Like,
Yeah.
you just cannot, no matter how good you get at it, even if you had like the optimal technique, there are things like extra blades of grass getting trapped in between the face and the ball. Maybe the club bounces up off the ground a little differently because depending on how tight the ball is to the turf, there's things that are outside your control. It's always going to be so much more difficult with the chip, pitch, bunker shot than a putt, which is why
Yeah.
greens and regulation is so important.
So it kind of reiterates this story that to break 190. So I think a top skill for golfers who want to get through those like first 2 scoring barriers is, with your wedges, being able to get the ball on the putting surface most of the time and 2 putting. So that's something you want to happen more often, because that's how you make more bogeys and less doubles and triples. Because a lot of those players who are struggling with, because if you're not breaking 100 or 90, like, you're missing 80, 90% of your greens. So on most holes, you are faced with a wedge shot on the green that's 30, 40, 50 yards away, something like that. And if you can learn to get the ball on the putting surface and two putt, like that is, you will experience a nice scoring breakthrough. But eventually you hit a wall. There is this wall that becomes the limiting factor. And that's why everyone seems to get stuck at this high 80s number at all handicap levels, is that if you just don't hit enough greens, like you can't make enough pars. You just can't. It's too much to ask of yourself.
I want to know a breakdown. I know we had Hutch on, but it was such a long time ago. I need to revisit that episode. But where double bogeys
I
come
remember it.
from?
That most of it was, so the number one reason was the combination of errant tee shots, meaning
So I
penalties
mean,
and recovery situations.
right? So it's just bigger misses then that's
Yeah,
causing it.
it was the tee shots, like big missed tee shots were the number one cause, like when you grouped it together, whether it was like going in the water or the trees. So like when you put those together, which is the same thing, like you sprayed it, you can't, like being able to hit that driver more in play will lead to much more scoring breakthroughs than getting up and down enough times. That's like what we're looking at backwards. So again, this cascading effect. You hit two or three fewer tee shots that are not in the junk or OB per round. Now you've placed way, 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 way less pressure on wedges and putter. And you stopped that cascading effect. Because once you hit it in a penalty area or a fairway bunker or trees, like you've already pretty much lost a full shot unless you do something truly miraculous. Whereas if you leave yourself 50 yards from the green, like how are you separating? You're not separating by getting up and down because no one's really doing that all quite often. It's more of like getting it on the putting surface, and two putting is like a good outcome, but not a huge separating outcome. That's the difference. That's where I think a lot of golfer, and I fought against this for years too. I'm like, oh yeah, it's all about the short game. It's like, no, there is a limiting factor in the short game with how much you can separate.
Well, I suppose the pushback to that is return on time invested.
Yes,
So I would say in terms of, okay, there might be, say from a 50-yard pitch shot, you might have zero point 0.3 of a difference between a scratch and a 20 handicap, just say. But if you're having 10 of those shots around, that's 3 shots potentially that you could gain
yep,
on a scratch. And then you'd have to say, okay, well, maybe I can gain 5 shots on driving and 3 shots on these pitches. But if I have an hour or 2 hours to practice, which one is more likely to gain the most shots? And
I
sometimes,
agree.
especially with short shots, or I say things like putting, lag putting, these are things that there might not be huge separation value, but because you've got so many of them in a round, and because they can be so quickly improved, like just 1 hour of effective practice with lag putting can really get you tightened up and dialed in. So that's why when I'm suggesting practice schedules to people, I say, look, for long term, for overall building, we need long game approach shots. But if you got a tournament tomorrow or today, let's get the short game dialed in, because that's the thing that can get quickly changed. But it also goes quickly. So you can
Total,
spend a lot of time doing short game, and then a month later of not practicing it, it's all gone. Whereas that's rare for that to happen with long game gains.
totally agree. I think the way I've looked at it, and again, so what I'm describing is in the context of why do golfers get stuck at a similar point in this game?
Yeah.
And it's because they can't hit their drives long enough and play enough or enough greens. And eventually they get stuck in this cluster. Now, what does it take for you to get from beginner to intermediate level quickly? I would say yes, cleaning up the double chips, the skulls, the chunks, the three putts, huge bang for your buck in terms of time invested and score reduction. That's where I've kind of settled on it. Like you clean up the very poor speed control and green reading, there's a few strokes there quite quickly. You clean up having like a go-to wedge shot that gets the ball on the putting surface and you work on that and get confidence in it, few strokes off pretty quickly. But the limiting factor is that eventually, like, you get to that point where you're like, all right, I've worked on this a good amount. Now, where is the next piece coming from? And then it's like, what are the longer sustaining breakthroughs? And that, again, there are outliers, but unless you were already great with your long game, that usually points to the driver and approach shots. But that takes more time and effort, right?
Yeah, definitely. Just
That's
right.
that's the bigger puzzle to solve.
I'd like a breakdown of, like, say you take the difference between a 20 handicap driving ability and a
Yep.
pro driving ability, and
Yeah.
then breaking that down into how many shots are lost through distance versus how many shots are lost through accuracy or penalty shots. Even these things, you have to, like, from a coach perspective, if someone says to me, "Hey, I'll lose a lot of shots through accuracy according to strokes gained," I want to get out on the course with them and monitor, when they do hit an offline shot and it's in the
Hmm.
trees or something, how much of that was down to this strategy versus an actual poor shot. It's like, I know Luke Kerr-Dineen and has done a good YouTube video on Sawgrass, the 18th at Sawgrass, and showing where the pros actually aim on this. I've done a version of that as well, and they're aiming down the right side of the field, almost in the right trees. I think it is in the right trees. Is the optimal middle point of their dispersion, which allows them, if for those who don't know, the 18th at Sawgrass, there's water all down the left hand
Yeah, if you
side.
put water in the left, you're reteeing pretty much at the tee box. So you're leaving yourself like
Yeah,
a 300-400 yard shot. It's a
yeah.
disproportionate penalty.
I actually played it in the GS Pro thing this week, and I aimed down the right side of the fairway. I hit my drive, and it comes up and it says it was 18 yards left. I'm like, oh, great, that's going to be perfectly down the left side of the fairway. It went in the water. I'm
Yeah,
like, oh
that's
my
got
God,
to
just
be
18 yards offline
yeah.
went in the water. That's
I
crazy.
mean,
That's like super tight.
other than the Winged Foot and Carnoustie, like I can't think of a that's like up there in the top 3 or 4 hardest closing tee shots in the world.
Yeah, yeah, especially under that pressure. Um, what were we talking about?
All right. Well, you were
My
saying
brain's
like the
gone.
difference between like a pro and a 20. So another way I think
But yeah,
about
so
this,
sorry,
yeah,
I'll just finish the thought on there. So
yeah.
yeah, on the 18th at Sawgrass, an amateur would probably aim right down the middle of the fairway, pull a shot 10 yards, it goes in the water, and they go, "Oh, I'm useless. I need to work on my accuracy." I, as a coach, would look at that and say, "Well, you hit that 10 yards left. That is a good tee shot. Like,
Yeah, you
that's a
just
good
aimed it
execution.
properly.
It's
Yeah.
just a sucky strategy."
Yep.
And so separating these things out, again, strokes gain doesn't always get to the bottom of these
Yeah,
things.
there's always more nuance. And even to what I'm discussing here, like these aggregate stats. I'm always the point of all of this is just to remove any like improper expectations you have of golf and like what will take you to the highest level, but then you have to compare that with your situation. So another way of looking at this, I put this in my book, was that let's say you had that competition between the tour player and the typical golfer. If you started at a 10 to 15-foot putt, what would mostly happen, assuming you randomize the targets? Most of the outcomes would be there'd be a lot of two putts, but the tour pro would one putt sometimes, and then the let's call it the 15 handicap with three putts sometimes. But you wouldn't see this like crazy disparity. And then let's say you went to a chipping contest from 20 yards away, then you're like, okay, I'm starting to see why this pro is so much better. But then when you get to 100 yards, you're like, oh, now the golfer's starting to thin and lay the sod over, and the tour pro's just hitting green after green after green. Then you go to 200 yards, and you're like, this isn't even like they're on a different planet. Like the pro's hitting like a 7-iron on the green, probably with no pressure, I don't know, 70-80% of the time. And the 15, they can't even reach the green. And then you go to drives, and it's like, so it's like the further you get away from the hole, generally speaking, the more you can see why most players are better than one another.
I was going to say, I haven't looked at this, but is it very linear? Like the farther you get from the hole, that's where the separation occurs? Because I'd imagine, like, from a 3-foot putt, the pro's not going to miss a single putt, really. Maybe they get 99%. But say they hole 100%, and maybe an amateur misses, say, 5% of
So
those.
yeah, there's a zone where there's a lot of separation. So like let's go to putting with Shotscope, because
So it's not
this
completely linear. The farther away, the lower,
well, yeah,
the bigger the
it's like these
separation.
big it's like
It's a
there's
bell
big
curve.
separations, and then it like so for example with like the
Okay.
wedges, like you would see way more separation in 10 to 20 yards and up and down rates, but once you get to 30, 40, 50%, like no one's getting up and down.
50
So
yards.
then it becomes, yeah, like that's why that 50-yard stat was like it's kind of flat everyone's taking 3 to 3.3 shots to get, so no one's getting up and down. But if you went to 10 yards, yes, the scratch golfer would get up and down 50, 60% of the time. And there'd be a much bigger separating factor as you get closer to the hole. So there's these like drop offs when you look at things like very close to the hole. But my overall point was that the biggest separation, like in general, where you're really looking at golfers' games, like as you get further away from the hole, like you start seeing these big changes in outcomes. Um, and the penalty from, you know, 150-yard shot, it's, that better golfer can perform so much better than the inexperienced golfer. It's like a mountain of difference between the two. So with putting, it's the same thing as short game. When you look at make rates, it's really so it's 50% for 8 feet for the PGA Tour, but that number starts to become somewhere between like 4, 5, 6 feet for normal golfers. But the big separator is 3 to 6 feet. So that's where golfers have the ability to. I'm sure there's some messy data in here because not everyone's like putting out and stuff like that. But in general, like where can you separate from one another? And it's really like, yeah, 3, 4, 5, 6 footers. Because once you get outside of that range, then it starts dropping off a cliff really quickly, the make rates. And again, that's why you can't get up and down from 30 yards and 50 yards. Like it's too big of an expectation. You can't hit it close enough to make enough putts, which sucks.
Yeah.
It's so hard. Like, do you know anyone? Have you ever played with a golfer who just like, you see some people like get up and down from everywhere, but like I've played a lot of tournaments at this point with a lot of scratch and plus handicaps. And like, I don't see a lot of short game wizardry where you're like, oh my God, this guy can get up and down from literally anywhere. I just see like,
I've seen lucky
yeah,
days, but
he
yeah, it doesn't
he hit
last.
16 greens, drained a few birdie putts, like made it pretty easy. It wasn't a lot of drama.
Yeah.
And that's so you have to think about, how do I get better at this game? How can I separate from my current game to the game I want to get to, or another person's game? And there are these, I guess, pressure points, you can call them. So lag putting would be one of them, right? Because you leave yourself less 7 or 8 footers and 6 footers. So speed control. And then you tidy up shorter putts. But there is a limiting factor. Like you can only get so good at it, where it becomes now the question of, where am I putting my practice time?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one.
That's
You
the
can
hard
only get
thing.
so good at something. It's like you could look at, okay, what's humanly possible?
Yes.
And then you could look to, okay, well, who's the best on tour at something? But I remember when Spieth was going through his crazy phase, he was holding like what,
Oh, yeah, it was from 50,
20%
yeah,
of 20 footers or something? It
from
was
15 to
ridiculous.
25 feet, he was historically good. It was a massive aberration.
Yeah, but even then it was, a reversion to the mean for
Yeah,
him
he
right
stopped.
at the end of it. So you'd have to,
Yeah.
I would want to look at, okay, what's humanly possible, but let's take a 10-year thing. It's kind of like investing, right? I have a bunch of guys saying, oh, look, I'm following this investor for the last year. He's had these crazy returns. I'm like, yeah, but there are a million investors. This one is just survivorship bias. If you get a million people to flip a coin, there's going to be one person who gets maybe 50 heads in a row. It may not have nothing to do with them. So yeah, I'd want to look over longer term what's humanly possible. But even on an individual level, so I chat about this with my coaching friend Anthony McCarthy. He's big on this philosophy, and I'm thinking about this in terms of what I'm trying to do with my project of my golf at the moment. I'm trying
Yeah.
to increase my distance, right?
Yes.
Because I've maxed out efficiency for driver. My approach play is okay. Putting sucks. I need to work on putting. Now, the theory is, oh, we'll just work on distance because I've got such a drop there.
Yeah.
Just work on distance and then I'll be up to where I need to be. But what if my capabilities are just never, ever going to be to have 110 mile an hour, 150 mile an hour cruising speed? It might
Well,
never be possible for
yeah,
me.
but
I don't know.
you're also at a level where it's like, even when I look at my, like, how am I going to get that much better? Like I made a massive jump, and then eventually you do get to a point where you're like, maybe this is it. I don't know. Like I can get
Yeah.
half a stroke better. Now, for everyone else who, we have so many golfers who listen to this show who are like COVID golfers and newer golfers. Like, I was just doing a YouTube video with someone like that yesterday for his channel. We were reviewing his round. Good athlete, 10 handicap. We were going over, he had videos of every shot he hit. Pretty good distance off the tee. I think high upside, but, hit it like 280 at a 200-yard shot into par five and just like hit a horrible hybrid into the junk and made a double. And I'm like, those are the shots that, you could only, that's your upside. Like, you have to look at your game and say, like, where is the upside? Where is the separating ability? And like, yeah, sometimes like, that's why I bring up the short game, long game stuff is because, yes, if you are chunking and hitting horrible wedge shots and three putting all the time, like quick gains there for the most part. But where's the next level? Well, if you're hitting 4 or 5 errant tee shots every round and you can't hit enough greens, like that's where the big, big, big upside comes from. Because again, those extra gains as you get closer to the hole, the separation becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. To go from someone who hits it to like 12 feet proximity from 30 yards to like 10 or 9 feet, how is that going to materially change your scores that much? Because you're going to miss most of those putts anyway. You'd have to be hitting it inside of 6, 5, 4 feet, which is not, tour players don't even do that. So I realize that's a bit of a pessimistic view, but like you do have to look at your own ship and see where the big leaks are.
You do. There is an element of guesswork, though. Like I said, using myself as an example, logic would say work on driving distance and work on putting because those are where I'm losing most of my shots. And I'm pretty confident that I can improve in those areas and that that'll have the desired effect. But who knows? Maybe I'm just someone who will never, ever putt well. And maybe in an attempt to try and improve my putting, it doesn't improve.
Yeah.
And then I lose out on other areas of the game that I could have improved on. So, or an example of this is maybe, at the moment I'm doing a lot of fitness work specifically for gaining speed. What if I'm spending 3 hours a week doing fitness work to try and gain speed? At the end of a year, I see my body didn't respond at all. I didn't gain any speed. And now I wasted 3 hours a week that I could have been practicing putting or something like
Maybe
that,
like I
or
wouldn't
even
view it like, yeah,
maintaining my long game. Maybe I can get even better with my irons. Maybe, someone could be tour average putting, but maybe they could be the best in the world putting. Maybe they have the potential to be best in the world of putting. We never know these things. I know
no,
that's a
you,
really
well, that's just
esoteric
like, yeah,
philosophy, but
that's like getting better at anything. There's a risk in investing time somewhere. But yeah, the question you're asking is like, do I invest more time in my weaknesses or maintaining my strengths? For me
or even
personally, like,
improving your strengths.
yeah, I spend a lot of time maintaining the strengths of my driver and irons because if those go, I'm going to lose score much faster. I've been trying to get better in my wedges to no avail so far. I'm going to keep trying, but I'm not spending like an insane amount of time and putting. Like, I invested a good amount of time like 5 or 6 years ago. That made a big jump for me. I don't really spend like, I mean, I don't spend a crazy amount of time practicing my putting. It's more maintaining the skill of my driver and irons because I know if I keep that, I will stay at this scoring level. If I lose that, then I could, lose it big time. Now, not everyone's in that position. Like, sometimes, I mean, most people don't even practice their short game in general. So I'm still advocating to spend some time there. It's just believing that like kind of myth that like that's the reason you're not shooting your lowest scores is like because you're not getting up and down enough. It's like that's just not true. It's because you're not hitting enough greens. You're not keeping the ball in play enough off the tee. You're not accessing your distance as much as possible off the tee. Like, that's generally speaking, if most golfers looked at their game, like that's where they are bleeding the big strokes.
Again, this from a coach perspective, I'm working with individuals, so I'm looking at which is going to be the biggest return on time investment, but also which one is the easiest. So an example of this, someone may have a good short game technique, but they just suck at controlling the distance. They're not providing good distance control. Or, someone may with their driving, they may be super accurate. They may be losing a ton of shots from distance and they're hitting down 10 degrees on it and launching it like 5 degrees. You could say, well, we could probably do an hour worth of work and get you hitting less down on it and get that ball launching higher. Or you could even tweak the equipment, get that ball launching higher and pick up 20 yards. So certain things from a technical point of view, or, approach game. Someone might be losing a ton of shots approach game because they get in these ruts where they start shanking it. Maybe they're pretty good most of the time, and then 10% of the time they hit 3 shanks in a row and they can't get out of it, or 10 shanks in a row and their round's ruined. And so that skill is pretty quick to learn, to how to not shank it on command. How to hit more towards the toe on command is relatively quick to learn. So again, you're just looking at what is the okay, you can look at the area of the game that's the biggest detriment for a person. Is it driving, approach play, putting, short game? But then you can dig into, okay, well, why is that a detriment for them? Is that easily solvable?
Yes, that is, if you go back to our library of episodes, and we've done episodes on how to use stats effectively, like that is our mutual desire, is to get down to the core reason that you have a deficit in one part of your game. Because if you say like, oh, I'm losing 3 strokes off the tee, it's like, great. Now what? Now you need to figure out why. That's the harder work to do. And if you do find out why and fix that, then the fruits of your labors are wonderful. So why did I bring up all these stats is that I think a lot of golfers tell themselves the wrong story. They have the wrong vision in their head of what better golf looks like for them. I did too for a long time. And I was kind of beating my head against the wall because like there was this disconnect between what I thought was reasonable and possible and what the truth was. And that made me kind of unhappy that I was never satisfied, like missing all these greens, not getting up and down. It's like, well, I also have to be honest with myself when you look at this stuff. It's like, yeah, if you miss like 15 greens around, like you're not going to be able to like cozy up the ball in like one pot. Like you're going to be hitting a lot of shots to 10, 20 feet, and that's okay. Like that's not something to go crazy about. And if I want to be the golfer I want to be, who was breaking 80 most of the time, I couldn't spray the ball over the place of my driver. Like that was the main thing holding me back. So yeah, it's if you've got the wrong story in your head and the wrong expectations, then you have a far lower chance of getting to your destination is kind of my point. Like that's the first thing you need to like eliminate is like not believe the generic stories that have existed forever where really good players say like, "Oh, just practice your short game all the time." I'd be all your shots are 100 yards and in. I'd be spending all of your time there, and meanwhile that player is like hitting 14 greens per round. They're like, "Oh yeah, great. You have the luxury of working on your short game because your long game is so amazing." Like you hear stories. Remember when Jason Day was number one in the world, and everyone would talk about like, oh, he spends hours on his chipping. He's like chipping and putting is so incredible, and it was, you know, it was unbelievable. He also hit it 320 and like just mashed it, like and had, he wasn't the best. Iron play was probably his weakness, but like can't just like gloss over the fact that his long game was also like incredibly elite, and that put him in a position to do all that. Mm. So yeah, I think what we said earlier is that the basic framework is that quick quick wins, quick scoring reductions can be found in the short game, that you hit a wall, and the longer lasting, more sustainable scoring advantages do come from your tee game and approach game. Like I think that is an unavoidable truth about golf. I feel pretty safe saying that applies to every player for the most part.
Is there a weird stat where scratch handicappers hit more fairways than pros as a percentage? They're not better drivers, obviously, but distance wise, total dispersion is probably lower, but they hit more fairways. Is that
I
right?
have not seen that one, but yeah, I mean, if you
I think
had
I've
someone
seen.
who is driving at 270 and a little bit straighter versus someone who was driving at 320 and less straight, you know,
Yeah.
the 320 player with, tour players don't hit a lot of foul balls. That's how you stay on tour.
Yeah. Plus
I
their
take the
fairways are
320
tighter.
player. Yeah, they just, to play professional golf for a living, like you do not hit a lot of foul balls. I think that is one of the most underestimated, the bomb and gouge thing has misled people into thinking that pro golfers are wild off the tee. Like, they are not wild off the tee. Like, go follow one around for 10, 15 rounds. Like, if you can't keep it in play, like, you will never make a dollar on tour ever. Like, they're incredible at controlling the face. And then when they miss fairways, it's like not by that much. Like, if you look at these setups, like they like go to, I mean, last week at Bay Hill, they're playing TPC Sawgrass. Like, a lot of these courses are really hard. Yes, they have the setups where they shoot 25, 30 under, but like half of them are very difficult. Like, they are imposing difficult golf courses. Like, they're remarkable off the tee. I'm still blown away by it.
What are the findings from this report?
Yeah, the putting is like, it's like the most extreme example of proximity. With wedges, I was talking about, 50 yards, there's really no separation. 30 yards, there's some. And, 10, 20 yards, that's when you get the bigger separation. But with putting, most of the separation is around 3 to 6 feet. And once you get outside of that, not many putts are going in. So if you can't make enough putts, then you're not creating any different outcomes. Like, that's why when people say like, oh, I use my putter 30 or 40 times around, it's the most important club in the bag. It's like, most of those putts have no value in terms of scoring. Like, a lot of them are like tap in 12-inch, 18 inches where, everyone makes them. So there's no ability to separate from one another. Or a lot of them, I think the average starting putt for most players is going to be, when you aggregate how many greens they hit or wedge shots, it's somewhere around like 15 or 20 feet or more. How do you meaningfully separate from someone if most of your putts are 20 feet from the hole? You can't, because most of the time you're both going to two putt. Like, you're not going to one putt that many times. Whereas if you put, again, the player for 120 yards in the fairway or 160 yards in the fairway, then you start seeing some meaningfully different outcomes. You chunk 150 yards, or you hit it on the green, or you miss the green 20 yards right versus having a 30-footer for par on the green. Big outcome difference. Miss the fairway 50 yards to the right in the trees, or hit it in the rough with a clear path to the green. Big outcome difference. There's so many different ways to look at this. Like, I can't putt a 3-foot putt out of bounds, right?
Your chance of holing a 30-footer is very, very similar to a tour pro.
Yeah. Yeah, what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to 3-putt from there most of the time. You're not going to
What is the average tour pro hole out from 30-foot? It's something like 5%, isn't it?
It's very, very small. It's under 10% for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's yes, you might putt a lot, but that doesn't mean because you use it the most, it's the most important club. Like, I used to say it all the time. It's just, it's false logic. From an absolute perspective, it's the club you use the most, but it has less relative influence than many people's drivers would. Because yeah, you going back to the driver stuff, like, you go from hitting 240, that's a big upgrade. Or you hit a few more fairways, or you hit a few less in the junk. That's a big upgrade. But you can only make so many putts and two putts so many times. Yeah, it's just something that, like, everyone has to decide how much time they're going to spend, where they want to invest it, who they want to invest it with. That's up to everyone else. Everyone has their own decisions with their game, and some people are tapped out on their long game and they have more gains on the short game. That could be true for certain players. That doesn't mean, just because what I said here doesn't mean you can't work on your short game, because your long game already might be great and you're kind of in maintenance mode. But yeah, why do most golfers get stuck in this, like, oh, I'm a 13 handicap, I can't get lower? Like, that's the story. It's like this cascading effect that starts from the tee box, not because you can't get up and down enough.
Good.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I'd love to have more to say on it, but I just don't.
I mean, it's
much to a lot of people's pleasure.
yeah. I think a lot of people on the show know this stuff. It's not. I think it's always worth revisiting. It's obvious in retrospect, but like, I played golf for 20 years, not thinking about this stuff or knowing it. It wasn't obvious to me. I just kind of like went out there with like no clue what was going on, and I would just like get frustrated at things I didn't quite get.
I think I was very fortunate in that, as much I was of the era where we were told short game and putting were really important, but I also was very motivated. I just want to become good at hitting the ball. And so I spent all my time doing that. Luckily, it was accidental that I didn't really listen to the mantras at the time there and work a ton on the short game. Although in retrospect, I probably should have worked more on my putting, but and
That's the thing
distance
is
as
like
well.
the funny part was when I was a teenager, like kind of getting serious about the game, my short game was quite good. I was way better than I am now. Like I was actually pretty tidy with a wedge around the green. I just couldn't score because I was just hitting the ball all over the map, like all over the place.
One thing that I really made an error on as a kid was, listening to the idea of when Tiger was winning and they were saying, "Oh, he's such an intelligent player and look, he's hitting irons off tees and things like that." So I'm like, "Well, okay, if that's what intelligent play is, how do I double that?" So I would literally do certain things like hit a wedge off a tee and then a wedge, and if it was a short par four where it's like 280, yeah, I would hit like 9, 8 iron off the tee, sometimes even wedge it in again, and think I was playing intelligently.
Yeah, watching him that open he won without using his driver was like the worst thing I could have ever seen because I was like, oh, you could just hit like irons off the tee everywhere and like, ha ha ha. This 2 iron was rolling out like 340 and whatever because it was his swing speed that was the advantage. But make no mistake, he was mashing his driver everywhere and hitting it farther than everyone. That was his advantage and his iron play. And it was, I mean, listen, he was great at everything. He didn't have weakness. But yeah, that is like eventually you reach this point. Some people at the show are at that point where they're like, what is it going to take for me to break through this thing? And like, yeah, that's where you have to really start looking at the game. You could track your stats, look at it, but you just have an intuitive understanding. You don't always need to track your stats and know every last bit of data. Like it all ends up showing up in our big three in the end. Like you just strike it better, control your low point, control the face. Like you'll shoot your lowest score as possible. Like that is the path. That's why we always talk about the big three. That's really what this report shows me. The big three are like the biggest separating because those are the ball striking skills that separate people with your tee shots and approach shot clubs.
And they always will be.
And they always, yeah, it'll never change. Like it always was that way. It just, we didn't see it that clearly. Anywho, that's it. You can download the report. There's some other stuff on there. I think I didn't cover. I covered most of it, but yeah, just thanks to Shotscope for putting that out. And just realizing that like, yeah, you're not going to break 80 or 90 by making a ton of birdies. It's more of like a lot of good bogeys and boring pars and then cleaning up those doubles and triples, which, some of them could be three putts and double chips, but again, think of the cascading effect. Everyone go back to your game and think about this cascading effect. Don't think about the 8-foot putt you missed. Think about all the shots that came before that when you analyze your rounds. Like you have to see why you arrived at this situation and work backwards and use our big three, use our strategy information, and then you connect the dots a bit more and get better. That's how it works. All right. Where can everyone find your stuff, Adam?
AdamYoungGolf.com. John, where can people find your stuff?
Check out the Four Foundations of Golf and my YouTube channel, John Sherman Golf. Thanks to everyone for making it this far, and we'll see you next time with a new episode.